What about the argument that it's better to be practical, it's better to be a realist, it's better to pick the lesser of two evils? I mean, in your case, certainly the Republican Party, despite John McCain's past opposition to the pro-life movement, he claims to support it now. I mean, how would you respond to the lesser of two evils? Mr. Nader, maybe you want to begin.
Well, if you cast a least worst vote without pulling the least worst candidate, John Kerry, say, or Barack Obama, in the direction of the 20 or so political constituencies, the Democratic Party, labor, women's rights, minorities, anti-poverty, environment, consumer, then you don't exert any pull at all, and the corporate interests are pulling on Obama and McCain 24/7. So it's a completely losing process, and that's why every 4 years both parties get worse. They get more corporate. Barack Obama is the first Democratic nominee to raise more money from corporate interests, Wall Street interests, and corporate attorneys than the Republican nominee, in this case John McCain. Why are these corporate interests investing in Barack Obama?
Let's let Mr. Baldwin take the last minute to answer them.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah. The lesser of two evils, as I tried to mention a minute ago, is I think one of the reasons why we're in the mess that we're in. That whole mantra. Let me just speak to the evangelicals for a minute. If they were a first-century Christian and they had the opportunity to vote for Nero or Caligula, which one would they vote for? Would it be Nero because he would slaughter a few less people than Caligula? I mean, where do we go with this? The fact of the matter is, I would contend that the way that we have been treating these Republican candidates lately, the Republican administrations are actually more harmful than many of the Democrat administrations. I dare say that John Kerry would not have been able to get away with many of the things that George Bush was able to get away with, simply because he was a Republican and the conservatives and evangelicals were asleep at the wheel, therefore. So I would contend that this idea that one is lesser than the other isn't true. If you don't have somebody with a commitment to principle, a commitment to the Constitution, it really doesn't matter whether they're Republican or Democrat. The carnage that results is felt throughout the country.
Okay, let's move on. The financial bailout, passed by Congress, vociferously denounced by some members of the House in both parties across the political spectrum, but supported by John McCain and Barack Obama, has so far failed to quell the turmoil in the financial markets, staunch foreclosures and bankruptcies, or stem job losses, which saw us shed 160,000 jobs last month and 750,000 jobs since the beginning of this year. To what extent is the bailout and the collapse of our economy an indictment of our ruling elites on both sides of the political spectrum? And does it presage a kind of political and moral collapse? And is there a link between the economic collapse and the inability to cope with natural disasters, to provide a decent public education for our young, missteps in foreign affairs, the failure for an adequate health care program, and certainly the protection of our constitutional rights? To what extent is this collapse reach beyond economics and become a kind of moral or social collapse within the country? And maybe you'd like to begin, Mr. Baldwin.
Yeah, this $700 billion bailout, which is just the first installment, it's already over $1 trillion. I read in USA Today that many more installments are in store. We don't really know how deep this is going to go. To me, this is a fraud perpetrated against the American people. I would personally hope that any of the congressmen that voted for it would be voted out of office on November the 4th by their constituents back home. I can't imagine those that call themselves conservatives, those that call themselves constitutionalists, that they could possibly support the socialization of our financial system, which is exactly what this is. I think we have to go back to 1913 when our country decided at that point in time to forfeit constitutional law relative to economics and forfeit sound money principles. They created this institution that we now know as the Federal Reserve, which is a private institution of international bankers, some of whom we don't even know who they are, most of whom are not citizens of the United States of America, but have created, in my judgment, the greatest fraud and hoax on the American people in the history of our country. And I really believe that what we are seeing now is simply the chickens coming home to roost. There's people like Ron Paul, by the way, whom I supported during the primary season, and I'm so thankful that Ron Paul endorsed me for president here just a few weeks ago.
Let's stop it there and give it to Mr. Nader.
Well, this is basically the last enactment of the collapse of corporate capitalist ideology. There are two ways corporations provide symbolic credibility for themselves. One is that they're patriotic. You know, they supply arms for our wars. And the second is that they bear the risks of market failure. And therefore they have to be meritorious or they go under. Well, first of all, they've lost their patriotism. Their giant corporations have no allegiance anymore to our country other than to control it or ship its industries and jobs to fascist and communist dictatorships. And second, unlike small business, where the remnants of capitalist principles prevail, they're free to go bankrupt. These giant corporations go to Washington for a bailout. But it's the worst kind of bailout. It's a bailout that's very vague, has no standards, doesn't have re-regulation, doesn't have anything for preventing home foreclosures. It doesn't have anything to give shareholders more power to control the company they own and restrain the bosses. And it doesn't have anything for criminal prosecution of the crooks or making the speculators pay for their own bailout with a tiny 0.1% tax on $500 trillion of derivative transactions this year, which has produced $500 billion. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a stock transaction tax, and we financed part of the Civil War. We've got to bring it back. That's the Nader-Gonzalez platform on this bailout when Congress comes back in January. They've got to do these things.